Hey guys, this is Ben, and I am by myself, and we're gonna have a chat. I'm really keen to talk a bit about movies over the next 2 episodes. This is gonna be sort of a special double feature talking about summer movie blockbusters. Now, cinema going and the love of film has changed a lot in the last few years. It was already happening prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it certainly seems to have sped up the process. And it looks like now to me that we're living in a world post-summer movie blockbuster. The films of yesteryear that I grew up on, that shaped my love of cinema, don't seem to be getting made in the same way as they were in the previous decades. Now, in this is going to be a little bit of a look back, a bit of a nostalgia trip, in which I'm going to look back at the last 3 or 4 decades of movies that came out in the summer through my life. These are going to be a lot of my favourite films, and it's going to be really fun to look back at them and have a chat with you about the things that I loved about them. And maybe there'll be some recommendations here that you take away that were about films that maybe you haven't seen, because we're going all the way back to the 1970s here. We're actually going to start a little bit before I was born, because I want to talk about the inception of the summer movie blockbuster, especially as it's 50 years this year since the first one actually came out. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. And then we're going to go on a journey over the next couple of episodes as we talk about these movies. And I'd love to get feedback from you, and I'd love to have you interact with me. And I thought this was a really good time to do it, because it's the summer. It's a really good, exciting season of movies that are coming out here in 2025. I've got multiple tickets pre-ordered to go to the cinema. I just saw last week the first of the sort of summer movie blockbusters, which was 28 Years Later. Then I've got the F1 movie, we've got a Jurassic Park sequel in there, and we've got lots of other stuff that I'm sure we will be covering on this podcast, including a new Superman movie and the Fantastic Four from Marvel. Lots of great stuff, but we wouldn't have had this sort of explosion of this type of film if it hadn't all started 50 years ago this year in 1975. So with that, let's take a little pause and let's get straight in to a discussion of the summer movie blockbusters that shaped my life. So it all began 1975 with a little fish story directed by possibly the world's greatest director, Steven Spielberg. I'm of course talking about my favourite film of all time, Jaws. I don't think there's much more that can be said about Jaws, but I'm probably going to say a little bit about it. I mean, I will be absolutely honest with you. I adore this movie. I think the performances are some of the best you'll probably ever see on screen. I am a massive fan of movies from the 70s. Obviously, I wasn't born until 1983. However, these films are the films I really grew up on home video and re-release in the cinema, and were very formative to me. The cast in this movie, Roy Schneider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Lorraine Gray, and others, especially the amazing supporting performance from Murray Hamilton as the town's mayor, really showed that at the heart of a great film are not the special effects. They are the performances, they are the characters, and they are the writing. I think it goes without a shadow of a doubt, and it was alluded to in the previous podcast where I was talking about the amazing performance from the young lead in 28 Years Later, that the performances from the children in Jaws are some of the most naturalistic and believable you'll ever see. Steven Spielberg has an absolute knack for that. He then proceeds to do this again in Close Encounters of the Third Kind and other movies. He can obviously put, and E.T., he can obviously put children at ease to the point they give you these very believable, extremely watchable performances that don't feel staged and they don't feel forced. You can't overstate the importance of Roy Schneider and Richard Dreyfuss in this movie, especially when they're standing up against the towering Hollywood behemoth that is Robert Shaw, a man who brought an intimidating factor to every production he was on. Obviously, at the time as well, Richard Dreyfuss was a go-getting young actor full of rebelliousness as well, and Roy Schneider brought that everyman grounding to the experience of the movie. Everyone knows the stories. The shark didn't work. The shark didn't work. It was broken. But of course, that's the strength of Jaws. It's the fear of what you don't see, coupled with an amazing John Williams soundtrack that transports you into the water with these characters facing this great white shark, full of fear, full of apprehension. So honestly, we're at a place where 50 years, I can't believe it's 50 years later, there are probably lots of people that haven't seen Jaws. It's about to get a re-release for its anniversary on 4K Blu-ray. I've already got my pre-order in because there's a new feature-length documentary attached to that. But I cannot stress this enough. If you haven't experienced the seminal scares and excitement that you can get from this movie, you've got to go and get that copy. You've got to go on streaming and check this movie out. Cannot recommend it enough. We're going to move past it though, because honestly, I've already talked a lot about this on this podcast. I love Jaws, and I would love to just hear more of your thoughts on it. It is a progenitor to so many movies that have come later. The idea that a monster can be the sort of slasher villain of a movie in the ways that we see in Friday the 13th, that it can be this antagonist of a force of nature, unstoppable in a way that the Terminator would be sort of known as later on in movie history. Absolutely incredible stuff. Please check out Jaws. Now, I did say that this was going to focus on the summer movie blockbusters of my life, and we've not quite got there yet, but I really have to mention a couple more films that are very formative and very important, and obviously were right there at the core of establishing the summer schedule of releases for these types of movies that would become so important to Hollywood going forwards over the subsequent decades. Jaws might have been the first, but perhaps the most famous summer movie blockbuster is Star Wars. Episode 4, A New Hope, 1977. Everyone knows Star Wars. George Lucas, coming out of kind of an indie background, pretty much an unknown at that point, had talent, had obsession, had a level of attention to detail and a singular focus that really made this film possible. You can't stress enough that without George Lucas, there'd be no Star Wars, and there would probably be no modern science fiction in the way we know it today. There'd probably be no modern blockbusters in we know it today. There'd be no modern franchise movie as we know it today without the original Star Wars. He created a genre. He created a way of making movies. He created an industry. You can't overstress the importance of Star Wars. You go back, you watch A New Hope, some might say it's actually a little bit slow. It's actually a little bit boring in places. It drags. That Luke Skywalker, he's kind of annoying. I can't argue with any of that. However, the impact it had on me growing up, huge Star Wars fan, mostly around the re-releases in the 90s, but obviously I had action figures before that. And it's just a beautiful movie in so many ways. I would love to see the unedited George Lucasified special editions released officially in 4K Blu-ray to really get into that and really look at that cinematography without the digital touch-ups that happened in the 90s. But look, he's the director. He has the creative control. If he thinks that movie needs touching up and needs going over again, who am I to argue? He's the genius that made it. If anybody can do that, it's George Lucas. I guess at this point, again, this is a movie that's been spoken about so much and talked about so much and is such a part of the popular lexicon. If you've not watched Star Wars, if you haven't seen the original Star Wars, I don't know who you are. I don't know if I want to know who you are. And frankly, I'd be shocked. It's almost as embedded into pop culture lexicon in the way that Superman is or that Coca-Cola is. It's ubiquitous with science fiction. It's a complete behemoth that's still going today thanks to Disney and what they're producing in the form of new movies and new TV shows. But you could say, can you beat the original? Especially not the original trilogy. I would say no. I would say A New Hope is perhaps the weakest of the three. Empire, often considered the best. I'll always have a soft spot for the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi because of how I grew up on that as a kid. But yeah, love me some Star Wars. Had to touch on Star Wars. Had to talk about Star Wars in terms of summer movie blockbusters. Next, however, we're still in science fiction, we're a few years later, and now in 1982, the year before I was born. But boy, oh boy, could you have a more different in tone piece of science fiction to Star Wars than Ridley Scott's Blade Runner? The other obviously interesting thing is we've got Harrison Ford again, known as Han Solo, now Deckard, the Blade Runner himself, in this incredible film. This film is as much about tone and cinematography as it is about the story and the characters. Now, you could argue actually the story sort of takes a bit of a back seat to the tone, because obviously over the years we've had multiple cuts of the movie where Ridley has played around with the structure, kind of in a George Lucas style, to get it where he's most happy with it, and have that ambiguity about the incredible Harrison Ford character and whether or not he is a replicant. I won't say my thoughts on that. I think if you've not seen Blade Runner, you have to see Blade Runner. I think cyberpunk has kind of come into the mainstream a little bit more again recently off the back of the success of video games such as Cyberpunk 2077, but also the success of anime such as Ghost in the Shell. I actually recently weirdly rewatched the live action of Ghost in the Shell and found it far more enjoyable than I did when it originally came out, starring Scarlett Johansson. However, Harrison Ford here in the original kind of dystopic cyberpunk setting, it is an amazingly visual movie with the soundtrack by Vangelis, with the amazing Rutger Hauer performance opposite Harrison Ford as the tortured antagonist, this robot in search of a soul. And soul is right. This film is all about soul, all about emotion and what it is to be human and what it is to sacrifice for a goal and never know what that success and what that sacrifice can earn you. I'd say there's some pretty overt connections to Vietnam in here. There's some connections a lot into consumerism, what it is to be human, in that you have to think about in the eras of the 80s where technology is starting to really make its way into the mainstream, and we're seeing so much more of that with computers and the internet just around the corner breaking into people's lives. I think it's super relevant now where we talk about the advent of AI, what that means to be transhuman, what it could mean in the next 5 to 10 years. Are we going to see an evolution of humanity into robotic, cybernetic, or information-based existence? Hell, we could already be living in a simulation, if you're tripping balls, like Elon Musk anyway. I love this movie. I've watched this movie so many times. It's got a fantastic sequel directed by Denis Villeneuve, which is Blade Runner 2049. I don't think 2049 is as good as the original. It's perhaps a little overly navel-gazing. This movie is definitely that. It doesn't move at a great pace. It's got just everything's dark and rain and smog and sort of unpleasant, dirty and grimy, and it feels such a lived-in world. This techno Los Angeles with pyramids belching fire on the horizon. Oh, I never get bored of looking at this movie. I could watch this movie with no sound on, though, you know, missing that Vangelis soundtrack would be painful. But I also kind of would just want to be in that world and to feel that world around me. It's so immersive, it's so gripping, and it pulls you in and holds you close. And then the action and the mystery and the amazing Harrison Ford performance. I mean, it was made for him. Harrison Ford's kind of minimalist, almost disaffected performance speaks very much, I think, to the actor as well. He's certainly of that type of performer. And I love this movie. I love Blade Runner. Check out Blade Runner. Again, it's nearly 50 years old, which just blows my mind. And there's probably loads of people that haven't seen this movie. So go back, check out Blade Runner. You will not be disappointed. The 4K Blu-ray of the final cut is a stunning addition and well worth checking out. Now we are actually going to move forwards into my birth year of 1983. And I can tell you, I definitely didn't watch this movie in 1983. And it's a bit of a twist. We're going into the land of comedy now. And we're going into the land of National Lampoon's Vacation. I can tell you now, my wife would not have this on the list. She's not a big fan of comedy, especially kind of cringy, fart and dick joke kind of humour that you find in the National Lampoon's movie. I think it's fair to say that the lead in this, Chevy Chase, has now become extremely problematic due to what you've heard about his antics on sets of various other productions. He's a very difficult person to get along with from everything I've heard, but obviously he was an SNL alumni and he went on from Saturday Night Live, one of the original cast members, to do the National Lampoon's Vacation series of movies. And I think these are just riotously funny. They're a fantastic time capsule of that era of 1980s sort of slapstick humor. Yes, they are problematic. Some of the jokes, some of the things said are uncomfortable, and you certainly wouldn't see them making their way into a film in 2025. But I think if you can watch it through the lens of the fact that this was made in the early 80s, it is a total humdinger of a movie. I think it's hilarious. I never get bored rewatching it. I've seen it many, many times, and I would highly recommend it. Again, one of those films that to me is a cornerstone of comedy, but I bet loads of people have never actually checked it out. It is well reviewed. It is well reviewed in terms of audience as well as critics. I think it's worth going back to if you can stomach some of the datedness of it. I'm not going to go through every summer movie, obviously. I'm kind of going to move through this at a fair clip and touch on some of my personal favourites, and I'm not going to hit on movies from every single year even, especially as we get into the later 2000s, where actually summer movies do drop off. The kind of staying power of them, the impact of them lessens as we get into the 2015s, because, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, that kind of movie going sort of antics around the summer has dropped off of late, and I really do hope we can bring it back. But National Lampoon's Vacation, bit of a dark horse on this list for me, but I would recommend it a lot. It's got some standout comedy moments. It's so entertaining. Check it out, please. Check it out. And tell me what you think. If you watch it and go, Ben, what are you talking about? That's one of the most awful movies I've ever seen because of X, Y, or Z. I will listen to that, and I will have an argument with you, and it will be fun. Please. So after that, we move into another movie from the 1983, the year I was born. I'd say it was a good year for this. This is a movie, obviously, again, didn't watch that year because I was less than 1 year old. However, I have been back and watched it many times since. I think this is a fantastically cool movie that combines sort of a teenage rebellious storyline with techno elements, and then up against Cold War hysteria, which is a great combination in my book. And that is War Games, starring Matthew Broderick. I wonder how well War Games translates into 2025. I wonder how well it's known or has been kept in the lexicon of many people. You know, Ali Sheedy plays the female lead in this as well, the love interest, as it were, though it's quite innocent and quite chaste. There's nothing untowards going on between Matthew Broderick's character and Ali Sheedy. But the concept of War Games is that, and again, prescient, kind of looking to our future, that there's a defense computer that is given control of the nuclear arsenal, and is what, or will be, and is then hacked into by tech wizard Matthew Broderick, who wants to play a game, doesn't understand it's a defense computer, and ends up almost igniting like World War III because they're not sure if the simulation is real, and there's questions of reality against fiction. Now, in 2025, where we're moving towards this technological epoch of deep fakes, where AI is talking to itself online now, where it doesn't even recognize itself as AI, and where we're getting more and more realistic AI generated videos and image content, the idea of what is real, what we can trust and what we can't trust in terms of, you know, politics or sectarianism, or in this case thermonuclear war, I think is a very, very prescient and very horrifically close to the reality we could be looking at right now. So this however is an 80s movie with loads of charm, and it's got a fun sort of storyline of young kids, plucky kids against the oppressive government, but ended up saving the day. I wouldn't know if many people know about this movie, if it's one you didn't grow up on, if it's one you didn't connect to as a young kid in the 80s or the 90s. I wonder if it's on anyone's radar, but honestly, I think it's a great time. It's a really fun film, really good performances. If you haven't seen War Games, check it out. But I keep saying that, but at the same time, I think that applies to all of these movies. If you haven't seen one of these films, please check it out. It's I'm really highly recommending it, so I'm not just doing it for fun. Very, very good stuff, War Games. So still in 1983 with that one. So let's see on my next one. Oh, we're moving forward a year. We're moving forward into, again, a seminal release that I do think, because it's created a franchise that's lasted through the decades. We've actually had a film out in the last couple of years in this franchise. But in this case, I do think it goes without a doubt that the original is still the best. There's been 3 films subsequently. None of them have lived up to the comedy of the original, and that is Ghostbusters. Who would have thought, again, an SNL alumni, original cast member Dan Aykroyd, would go on to make a film with Bill Murray, comedy titans as they were, about hunting ghosts as blue-collar workers in New York, and it would work. It's hard to imagine that you would ever see a film like this made today. The pitch is so off the wall, the concept is so completely batshit, and it really shouldn't sustain a 90-plus minute long movie. It shouldn't work, and yet it does through the strength of the comedic timing of its leads, of how well defined the characters are in their archetypes, and that they're able to play off each other with such sharp dialogue and performance that it carries the kind of crazy, silly concept through to a fun, rip-roaring conclusion, supported by a fantastic soundtrack full of bangers that you will remember, that stick in your ears, and that I won't need to go over today. It's got an incredible theme tune, obviously, that everyone knows, but the music throughout is really, really, really good, and the soundtrack is incredibly powerful as well. Really good stuff. And let's not forget, we've also got a crazy good performance in here from Sigourney Weaver in a supporting role, but she is brilliant. Again, comedic timing, showing her chops, showing she's got range beyond Ripley at this point. So I love Ghostbusters. I will never get bored of watching Ghostbusters. I think Ghostbusters 2 is pretty weak. I think the female-led Ghostbusters is actually quite good, and I think leans into the comedy more and understands what it is. But again, it doesn't live up to this. Then we had Ghostbusters Afterlife and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire with Paul Rudd and a young supporting cast. I think they're trying to connect there with the real Ghostbusters style cartoon show, and it's fine. But the original is so far ahead of any of those sequels. It doesn't matter how many aging cameos you get from the original cast and plug into those modern sequels to try and get on the Member Berries nostalgia train. It doesn't make them great movies. They're fine, they're fun, they're entertaining, I'll watch them. But I'll watch the original Ghostbusters over and over and over and over. The jokes, the set pieces, the special effects, the acting, the direction, Ivan Reitman, what he captured with those movies. Oh my God, I just absolutely adore Ghostbusters. And again, if you ain't seen it, stop what you're doing, leave work, pull over, watch Ghostbusters. I don't care what you're doing. Watch Ghostbusters. Next up, well, I mentioned her already, haven't I? I've mentioned her already. Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley in the original Alien is a fantastic, fantastic performance. However, Aliens landed in July in 1986. Possibly the greatest sequel of all time. Directed by Jim Cameron. It's pretty damn amazing, isn't it, Aliens? I've probably watched Aliens more than I've watched Alien. I mean, Alien, directed by Ridley Scott, Aliens, directed by Jim Cameron, both at the heights of their power, both at the heights of their creativity and skills as directors, both coming at the same source material from very different perspectives. But the goal in the 80s and the 90s always is to make a sequel that is bigger, badder, more badass, more explosions, more intense, more over the top than its predecessor. And you cannot deny the power of Aliens. On top of all of that, we've taken the original Alien concept, that is this haunted house slasher movie with a monster, and we've blown it out with Marines, with not one alien, hundreds of aliens, with an alien queen, with all of these crazy over-the-top sort of set pieces, incredible action, incredible special effects, a brilliant supporting cast through the Marines, again hitting on all those archetypes that, you know, would be considered perhaps a little cliche, the kind of soldiers that you'd expected to see in the Vietnam War, with text scrawled on their helmets, with this kind of bro ship. Like, they basically established the Space Marine template that would get riffed on in films and video games for decades to come. To this day, we're still doing it. There's so many enduring character types that appear in Aliens. We've got an incredible central performance from Sigourney Weaver. I do think perhaps Sigourney Weaver isn't given enough credit over the years. She is awesome. She is such a powerful actress with such range, with such depth of emotion, with such sort of heart and yet strength. She somehow can balance being a badass bitch with being this, grieving mother that's lost her child and therefore trying to connect once again with a young girl. It's so nuanced and yet wrapped in this popcorn chewing, coke guzzling, just big summer extravaganza, and yet also horror, and yet also levity, and yet also great character. I do sometimes look at movies, especially summer movies, especially blockbusters, the Marvel output comes to mind, and it's just missing bits. It's just missing some of that creativity, some of that heart, some of that ability to connect to the audience, to give us something fresh and original. And this was a sequel, and yet it feels like it's an entirely its own thing. It's absolutely genius. It's incredible how that he takes this concept and expands it and makes it and blows it out and makes it bigger and better and more badass. Like, props to Jim Cameron. I think Aliens is the best film in the Alien franchise. Again, this is what Alien was great, but I think Aliens is what made it possible for that series to become, this behemoth that is still going today, that is still well regarded. We're about to get on FX and Hulu a new Alien Earth TV series that looks great. The trailers look amazing. That's landing in August of this year. So, yeah, go back, watch the original Alien, watch Aliens, and then check out some of the latter films. Absolute quality. So we're flying through the years now. So that was 86. We're going to jump another couple, and we're going to hit 88. 88 miles per hour, you might say, perhaps, in reference to Back to the Future. But no, I'm not here to talk about Back to the Future. I think some would consider Back to the Future a summer blockbuster, but I don't like those films that much. So I'm gonna ignore that. No, 1988, we are talking about the films that put an action star on the map, in the fact that Bruce Willis went from a romantic comedy lead in Moonlighting to John McClane in Die Hard, opposite the indescribably brilliant Alan Rickman playing Hans Gruber. And my oh my, if you don't know Die Hard, I mean, you must know Die Hard. If you've never seen Die Hard, you've seen GIFs, you've seen homages, you've seen references to this. This is the original man trapped, gotta solo his way out of a difficult situation film. He is fantastic. This is the first time we saw an action movie star be a regular guy. Before this, we had Sly and we had Arnie, and they were great. Don't get me wrong. I love Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sly Stallone. Everything from Rambo to Terminator. Absolutely brilliant stuff. But they're these giant Adonises that nobody could ever consider themselves comparable to. Whereas John McClane is this blue-collar cop. That's hard to say. Blue-collar cop. Yeah, he's this blue-collar cop, said it many times now, who is in LA, fish out of water. He's from New York, but that's where his wife's run off to for a job. They're having trouble. He's gone to see her at Christmas. It's a great setup. He wants to win her back. He wants to convince her that he's not this layabout, that he's more than just a job. And then these criminals, break into Nakatomi Plaza and they take over, and they, just chaos ensues. It's funny to try to go through the plot of this movie. I know it so well. I've seen it so many times. I feel like, why should I bother explaining Die Hard to anybody? Everybody knows Die Hard. Everybody's seen Die Hard. But I guess maybe that's not true. It is a fantastically cool movie. What John McClane goes through, the hardships he faces for the love of a good woman, the motivation it gives him, and then Alan Rickman and his performance, and what you actually find out the motivations were for him is just really interesting and funny and base and sort of really quite simplistic. Before everything had to be about global terrorism, you could have villains that were just greedy. Height of capitalism in the 80s, and it made a lot of sense. And I adore this film. I adore the performances. Bruce Willis made a lot of poor movies in the latter stages of his career, especially when he was diagnosed with the condition he was facing, which explained a lot around those choices. You can't blame him for that, wanting to set his family up. But when you go back to the height of this man's star power, the films he was making around Die Hard and what came, the sequels as well. I absolutely love Die Hard 2. It's almost like the formula is even more engaging because it's in an airport and it's set at Christmas, but there's this added peril around planes falling out of the sky. I love the Die Hard series of movies. I know they've tried to kind of bring it back, and it's it kind of dwindled and fizzled out. And I don't think they need to. I don't think there's Die Hard without John McClane, without Bruce Willis. I wouldn't want to see it recast. I just watch it again. I'd watch it again and again and again. I don't need it with anyone else. So yeah, that was 1988. We're moving through the years now. We're nearly into the 90s, and the next film is gonna bring us into the 90s. So 1991, another example of a Jim Cameron sequel being even better than the original. In a way, I think we could blame James Cameron for the propensity for studios to bank on sequels, because if some of these movies that are sequels hadn't had the runaway successes that they had at the box office and then in home video, maybe studios would have greenlit less of those questionable sequels that were not nearly as good as the originals, but again were probably worth it to make back some money. And we might have had a slightly different cinema landscape. But would I willingly sacrifice Aliens and Terminator 2 Judgment Day from 1991 to kind of reduce that? No, not in a million years. Terminator 2 is just an awesome movie. It's very different to the original. Obviously, Arnie goes from being this unstoppable killing machine of evil to an unstoppable I won't kill anyone machine to save the day, because Arnie's rise to popularity and fame basically dictate the fact that the only way they were ever going to get him back was if he was now a good guy. And to be honest, the scriptwriters there, they did the work. They kind of made it make enough sense that you were willing to go on that ride with Arnie in a positive space rather than a negative space. And he is just... And the other thing that happens with Terminator 2, which I think is really interesting, is that it's slightly more approachable. It's made for a wider audience. It's no longer the dark, graphic, awful kind of horror of the original. And it's widened out. There's more humor. There's obviously a child protagonist in this, with Edward Furlong playing John Connor, savior of the future, before he is John Connor, savior of the future, obviously. Again, do I need to explain the plot of Terminator 2 to anyone? I mean, surely I don't. But the main thing that you're watching this for is Arnie's, leather-clad, motorcycle riding, shotgun toting T-800. And then we couple it up with the T-1000, who is Robert Patrick, and he's, an upgraded Terminator, more scary than ever, liquid metal, amazing special effects from ILM here that really, make sure this film has lasts the test of time, because so many special effects obviously date movies, but they have such a high quality and they feel so filmic that you can kind of watch them even today and still be swept along and enjoy what you're watching. But Terminator 2, I think a lot of people again would argue that this is better than the first one. I really love the first Terminator. I think it's got an unrelenting pace to it. I think it's incredibly violent, but I remember, we're talking about the films that were formative to me. I remember sneaking a watch of that, maybe the first Terminator, I must have been 10 or something like that when I first saw Terminator. Not that my family knew that at the time. I can't remember if it was a friend's house or if I watched it late at night, but it was just awesome. It felt so illicit and so wrong to be watching Terminator, but just amazing. You can see why kids love Arnie. You can see why all the young boys wanted to be like the Terminator back at school back in those days. He is just incredibly cool. Just the super badass. Love Terminator. Love Terminator 2. After that, sequels get a bit... not as good, not as consistent, that's for sure. All over the place. Some actually terrible. But we'll still have Terminator. We'll always have Terminator 2. So that can't be all bad, can it? Right, flying through now. Now, 93. I am 10. And now I am old enough to be getting excited about films that are actually coming out in the cinema. And I remember this very distinctly. And this was interesting because this is a film that was, I think it was a PG or a PG-13. It might have been, actually, if I remember right, this could have been the first ever PG-13. I'd have to look that up, but I could be right about that. But I remember at the time, at that age, I was super into dinosaurs. So when I heard about Jurassic Park, and I remember us having a poster of the T-Rex from Jurassic Park on the back of the door to our downstairs little like cupboard bathroom, and it was because it was downstairs in like this tiny little room on the outside of the house. It was always freezing cold in there, and we had this poster on the back of the door, and it was tiny little cupboard. So you were sat on the toilet looking at the door, and on that poster was just a T-Rex's open mouth, and you could just fall into it, and it was a really scary poster. And I'll never forget that, and I'll never forget seeing Jurassic Park in the cinema and it being just the most incredible thrill ride. This non-stop, and really apt, because my favorite film of all time is Steven Spielberg's Jaws, and here we are talking about another incredible Steven Spielberg production with incredible young characters in it as well that he gets great performances from. And in many ways, this is a film that is very related to Jaws. It's about 20 years later, but it's about, monsters and creatures, forces of nature and man trying to come to terms with and do battle with it. And obviously Jaws ends with the destruction of the shark, but this is a very different ending in Jurassic Park, where actually nature wins, that, the T-Rex stands tall and victorious at the end of this movie. Spoilers, by the way, but if you haven't seen Jurassic Park, what are you doing with your life? But no, this movie, the emotions this movie created, the action, excitement, the horror elements, the violence, but not too much violence. You didn't really see much. It was much more about, the fear of what you don't see. The great character, Sam Neill. Oh, he's so good in this as Dr. Grant. He is just awesome. I mean, the whole cast, Laura Dern, the implacable Jeff Goldblum. It just maximum Jeff Goldblum as well in his performance as Dr. Ian Malcolm. And then Richard Attenborough. The legend of British cinema, Richard Attenborough as John Hammond. It's an awesome star-studded cast who maybe weren't all the biggest stars at the time, but you look back at that and the careers they've had since, and how important those performances were, and how impactful, and how, and then you couple it all together, all that great direction, great acting, great performances, and then bring it together with some groundbreaking special effects from RLM. The combination of bigatures, of large puppets, of mechanical, and then for some of the first ever full-scale CGI modelling of creatures. And I mean, CGI technically has come on so far, in the intervening years. It's come on to incredible leaps and bounds, but the artistry displayed, when the budget was there, where the time was given to those teams to make these incredible shots, like Jurassic Park 100% holds up today. You can watch that movie again and again, and I don't think it will ever age. I don't think it's ever going to look dated. It's just beautiful, perfect, wonderful cinema. It's the perfect blend of a summer blockbuster, which gives you all of those emotions. That it is like a roller coaster ride. It's like going to a theme park, and I loved going to theme parks as a kid. And it was very much that feeling of the highs, and then the way that film is balanced with the different set pieces, and then the lows, and the time to breathe and to take a breath. When think about when they're up the tree and the diplodocuses come, or think when they're having the Jello and the cakes and stuff back at the visitor centre after they've gone through the trials and tribulations, crossing back over the electric fence, and they think they're safe and they're not safe, and that's when we get the amazing raptors stalking them through the visitor centre. It's got so many great moments. The chase with the T-Rex, the original, the first T-Rex attack when they're in the cars. Oh, it's just like moment after moment of absolute 5-star, 10 out of 10 brilliance. Perfectly paced, perfectly directed, perfectly edited, perfectly shot, perfectly scored, perfectly performed. There is nothing wrong with Jurassic Park. If Jaws wasn't already my favourite film of all time, I think it's fair to say Jurassic Park would have a really good shot at that spot. Absolutely peak cinema. Peak cinema. And now that we're into the era of me seeing films and remembering seeing them in the cinema, I will obviously talk about that more. However, that is not relevant to the 1994 summer blockbuster that was made by now one of my favourite directors, but I don't think I'd have considered him one of my favourite directors at the time. I've definitely gone back and embraced the films he's produced sort of as a collective. Subsequently, I remember enjoying his movies, but Jan de Bont never stood out to me as a name like Steven Spielberg when I was first getting into cinema in my late teens. But then you look back at what he's created, films such as Twister and Speed, his connection to the Lethal Weapon franchise as the director of photography. You know, he has had an amazing collection of sort of 90s era action movies. And in Speed, he teams up with Keanu Reeves in the kind of lead role as a slightly strange policeman, Jack. And he doesn't have a lot of character to him. And I don't think characters are the strength of this movie, though. Don't get me wrong, Jack does a good job, and Sandra Bullock performs well. But obviously, in a movie like this, really the character you're focusing on is the villain, and that's Dennis Hopper, and he just chews scenery, and every time he's on the screen, you can't go wrong with Dennis Hopper. He's amazing to watch. But the real propulsive nature of Speed, of course, is the concept, which is the idea that there's a bus and it's driving around a day and it has a bomb on it, and once it goes over 50 miles an hour, the bomb is activated, and if it drops below it, it's going to explode and kill everyone on the bus. What a brilliant, taut, exciting action thriller concept. Police officer Jack, played by Keanu Reeves, finds a way onto the bus. Sandra Bullock ends up driving the bus, though she is not a bus driver, and they kind of work their way through this thriller setup. It's a really cool, fun action movie that I've seen many, many times, and I think really holds up to this day, because there's a purity to the idea of it. It's not overly complex, but it's also not super realistic, so you can really get into the excitement and the adventure of it. There's a nice will they won't they sexual kind of chemistry between Keanu and Sandra Bullock, and they do a really good job with that. This was sort of like, it's weird looking back at Keanu Reeves' career, because I think he's one of these actors where at the time you could have looked at him and gone, oh, he's got a weirdly like disaffected, underperforming kind of approach to all of his roles. But then actually you kind of, looking through the lens of the successes of John Wick and looking back through his career, you actually realise what he's kind of trying to convey, a little bit ahead of its time, is sort of this inner strength, this sort of Taoist principle to a lot of his lead roles, to a lot of his stronger characters, where they have this, he's trying to bring out this sort of inner calm, and that's the strength that he wraps around himself in his performances. It's definitely visible here in Speed. It's also visible in Point Break, and I think he is just a very fun guy that's picked a lot of fun projects over the years, not least of which, of course, is Neo in The Matrix. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Keanu Reeves. I really, really, really enjoy this film. I also liked Jeff Daniels in a supporting role in this movie as well. One of those films that I do wonder, again, like some previous ones, that if this wasn't one you kind of grew up on, that you didn't have the VHS of in the 90s, are you even aware of it? Like, do young people or younger people of a younger generation, maybe people in their 30s or their 20s, have they seen Speed? Like, if you've not seen Speed, I think you really should check out Speed. It is not a wasted couple of hours. I mean, I think it's a taut thriller. It flies along. It really propels you through to the conclusion. Lots of cool explosions, lots of cool action. They jump a bus across a freeway. It's pretty badass. Like, honestly, it's a good time. Speed is a good time. Moving ahead, I think this will be the last one I talk about in this first episode of looking back at summer blockbusters, and that's Apollo 13. This came out in 1995. I can't believe that. 30 years ago. That's crazy. 1995. Again, this was one I think I did see in the cinema when it came out. It's interesting because in a way it's a biopic, right? So it's a film about a true events of what happened on the Apollo 13 mission, the harrowing time 3 astronauts had in space when everything went wrong, and how the heroes at NASA and those astronauts worked the problem and got them back home safely. Now, at that time as well, this is obviously set in the 60s when it really happened, but space travel is inherently dangerous, and generally when things go wrong, they go really wrong, and it's very hard to prevent the loss of life. But in this situation, they genuinely got through it. It is an emotional, exciting, thrilling film to watch. It's directed by Ron Howard. It's probably my favourite Ron Howard movie, actually, of all time, starring Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton and Kevin Bacon. Bill Paxton. I think it's worth mentioning him at this point because obviously he's had roles in a few of the films we've already talked about, including Aliens, and he was such a great such a great actor at the peak of his powers in the 90s. Really, really great performances. He showed up in a lot of films that I love, action movies, and he's obviously a supporting character, very rarely the lead, though one of my other Jan de Bont favourites, Twister, of course, is the lead in that. Very sadly has passed away now, but I'm so grateful we got Bill Paxton. I love his stuff. He's such a fantastic actor, and obviously he's up there with Tom Hanks, one of the biggest Oscar winners of all time, an incredible actor, and then Kevin Bacon as well, who was obviously huge in the 80s, dropped off a little bit after the 90s, but is still working today and is still a fantastic actor. I mean, you've also got Ed Harris as well in this, who's back at Mission Control, supported by Gary Sinise's character as well, and it's just a fantastic ensemble cast, and it's one of those things where it's great to see sort of intelligent people being intelligent, helping each other. So there's this wonderful element of humanity to Apollo 13 where the astronauts support each other. They're going through a really tough time, but Tom Hanks keeps them together and keeps them as a unit. And then back on the Earth, you've got Ed Harris driving the guys, trying to support them and trying to make sure that, smart people save the day. And it's not about brawn. It's not about might. It's about intelligence. And I think it's a really inspirational film in those regards. It shows us that humanity and intelligence will help us win and support each other, and I think that's a really lovely message. It's a very emotional film, and it has obviously a wonderful happy ending, right, which is not what you'd expect from necessarily this kind of movie, but of course it's a true story and that's what really happened, and I think that obviously adds to it a lot of impact and pathos. And again, I hope this is like, even if you have seen all these movies, I hope this list that we talked about this week will have sort of reminded you to check out some of these classics that maybe you haven't seen in a long time. And if you haven't seen them at all, please, all of these films I've just talked about today are worth checking out. Absolutely amazing stuff. So I've still got lots more to talk about, right? So in the next episode, we're still going to be in the 90s. We're going to be kicking off in 1997. I wonder if you can guess which summer blockbuster from 1997 I'm going to talk about, because I've actually got two on my list from 1997. So I wonder which one you think, or ones you think I'm going to be chatting about in the next episode. If you can leave a comment and guess, I will give you mad props. No prizes or shout-outs guaranteed. But that was the first episode of this nostalgia-filled look back at my favourite movies from the summers before, and my childhood, and even before I was born, and the movies that really shape my love of cinema. So I'll be back in the next episode to talk about 97 through to today, but please give us a like and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Audible, and anywhere our podcast can be found. You can also follow us on Twitter, or X, Blue Sky, Instagram, or any of those socials as well. Love a review, love a comment, love that engagement, and until next time, go watch some movies. It's the time of year, guys. It's the time of year. Watch films.